Hi, everyone. This is my contribution to this week's critical conversation on the topic of the war in Israeli-Palestine war. I'm responding to Vanessa Clark's very good post, giving some background to the complexity of the conflict. I also enjoyed listening to the New York Times opinion columnist Ezra Klein's show. And I thought he added credibility to his show by being a Jewish American and adding criticism to his historical homeland. He just kind of outlined the topic very well. 61,000 dead out of 2 million Gazans, the size of Detroit, starving people, and then, they got into the complexity of, what the definition of genocide really means and the difference between genocide and genocidal intent and how hard that is for, Philippe Sands, the human rights lawyer, kind of discussed how hard that is to win cases in court. But it's a terrible situation, and Vanessa Valencia Clark got into some of the good background of the story. Um, you know, this was these displacements took place after World War II, when the Jewish historical state was reestablished by the British. Um, it separated different communities, different ethnicities, and they were resettled um, under terms that were more favorable to the Jewish people than the Palestinians. The Jewish people claiming historical rights to Jerusalem and to their historical homeland, which you brought up. Um, yeah, and you know, just to add to that complexity, there's actually these two factions. There's the Hamas faction in Gaza, and then there's also the Palestinian Authority, which is in um, which would be in East Jerusalem, and that would be the West Bank, and that's where the Palestinian Authority and many Palestinians live there as well. They're both groups are Palestinian. One group is controlled by a much more organized, group, the Palestinian Authority, much more funded by Israel. And then, you brought up the idea of the blockade in 2007 and how Israel systematically started, because both these states are very reliant on Israel for food, for electricity, for desalination, for other, for jobs, and so they're actually very dependent on Israel, which then allows Israel to be, can be more, can exploit the Palestinians much easier because of that dependency. Um, you mentioned the blockade, yeah, of Gaza, where education slowed down, they restricted movement, and it was just straight up discrimination. Um, yeah, it's a terrible situation there, and I'm going to get into some of my thoughts here about it through the questions. The first question was, what human rights are being violated? Oh my gosh, there's quite a few. I counted one. I mean, and I could have added maybe a couple more, but I saw 1, 2, 9, 13, 15, 23, 24, and 25. Number one, we are all born free and equal. Oh, just the disparity to resources, access to clean water, clean food. Currently, under this war, these poor folks the poor Palestinians in Gaza don't know where to go to find safety. When they go, it's a terrible situation. Freedom from discrimination. They're very much discriminated against. Innocent civilians who are not a part of Hamas are just grouped in as being part of Hamas. Freedom from arbitrary detention. They're arresting, young kids for throwing stones and giving them, long jail sentences. Freedom of movement that was discussed by Valencia. They can't they can't leave their country, or their country, or their state. They can't leave Gaza. They've been trapped there since 2007. Right to nationalistic and of a state of some kind. Yeah, we're still waiting for a state. They seem to be losing land, not gaining land. Uh, right to Social Security. Gaza has no Social Security. The society is not functioning. They can't. There's no hospitals that are running. There's very few hospitals. There's access to food is denied. Um, yeah, it just goes on and on. I'm going to go on because I'm kind of long-winded. Number two, how would I advocate for the rights to be addressed? Human rights lawyers in droves, very respected ones, have been filing lawsuits in the international criminal courts, in the UN. They filed charges against Netanyahu and some of his associates they've been designated as war criminals. That does restrict their travel in some countries, although the U.S. is not a part of the International Criminal Court, so they don't recognize the judgments there. For me, on a personal level, I will attend protests that are against our government's complicity in supplying weapons and not stopping the war in Gaza from this, all the senseless killings of civilians and destroying all their infrastructure for the future. I mean, there's nowhere to go back to. They have to rebuild it. I think it's 75% of all the buildings in the entire state, Gaza Strip, the size of Detroit, are completely just annihilated. My thoughts on the conflict. Yes, I agree with what you said, that there's history to it. Both the Jews and the Muslims believe Jerusalem is the holy city, going back to the Crusades. The Jewish state, it treats the Palestinians as second-class citizens. Many caring people around the world realize that on both sides of the aisle. Access to jobs, education, health care. It just goes on. Will it eventually end? Yes, this conflict will eventually end with some sort of treaty. It will involve Hamas, freedom fighters laying down their arms and letting go of the hostages that remain and the bodies of the victims. It's so complicated that I'll give you just a quick example. John Mearsheimer, University of Chicago professor, wrote a book called The Jewish Lobby, which he outlines something called CPAC, which is an organization that it's a super fund PAC that funds congressmen to hold pro-Israeli views no matter what. For example, Ted Cruz is on their payroll, receives $1 million a year to have a pro-Israel stance on everything. What can social workers do? Oh my gosh, the trauma from this war, the displacement, starvation, lack of health care, PTSD forming, depression, attachment disorders, addiction, on and on. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of need for social workers to help out and to try to bring stability back to Gaza, and hopefully they'll have a permanent state. Thank you very much.